Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Khanjan. I hope you're all doing great and keeping safe. Today I'm delighted to start my TTL series, which is Talk to Leaders with Chisa. Ellen is the founder of Dark, which is a programming language coupled to its editor and infra. She has worked on leadership projects with Kickstarter, Lola, Microsoft, and the likes. She also has attended Harvard Business School and right now is assisting startups and investing in their growth. So, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to.
Let's start with the most basic question that I'm the most curious about. Back in the first decade of 2000s, when you entered the product world, when it was not that common, how did you enter this field and how did you start doing the things which you ended up starting at that time?
Yeah. So when I got into product, it was still fairly new. It was kind of when I feel like everyone knows about APM programs and rotational PM programs now. But back then it was basically, I think, just Google. But I went to school in engineering and I liked software, but I was the sort of person who every time I hit a syntax error, I got really frustrated. And I felt like it took way too long to write code compared to to think about what to build. And so kind of every project I was in, I ended up in this role where I was helping decide okay, what can we build? How can we scope it out? What are the different chunks? How are we going to test them? How are we going to make sure all this works together? And I was really surprised to learn that was actually a job and that it was called product management. The first book I read on it was Scott Berkins' Making Things Happen from his time at Microsoft. And so I ended up realizing that was something I was really excited about. And so I went directly into product management from college.
Wow. And then you also ended up founding a startup at that young age. So how did that happen? How did you really that step? Did you have any guidance from anybody or did it all occur to you while you were graduating and working?
It was before I graduated. So what happened was the college I went to for undergrad, Olin, was brand new. So we were the fifth graduating class. So when I went there, it was unaccredited. So pretty much everyone there had at least a little bit of a risk-taking profile. Kind of had to be willing to go to a brand new school. And what happened was that throughout the first 2 years, a lot of my friends and I would sit around and talk about ideas and talk about what to start. And so towards the end of our second year of school, we basically said okay, are we just going to do it? The school let us take a year off and have a startup. We can live in a house together. We'll figure it out. We didn't even know what we wanted to build. And I think there were 10 of us in the room and we just picked a day and we all sat around the room in the circle and everyone just had to say in or out. And so 6 of us decided we wanted to do it. And so we started working on ideas together and we ended up gravitating towards EdTech and specifically tools to allow middle school students to collaborate better together. And so we spent the year building out an alpha of that. And it was fun, but definitely taught me how much I didn't know about startups.
Wow, that's quite an unusual story. So then I'm sure you might have faced a lot of challenges. So what were they and how did you overcome and what learnings did you keep with you from that experience, which you use even today?
Yeah. So I think a big one, and I think about this continuously, is how much the team really matters. And so I think from that perspective, 6 people is too many people to start a startup with to begin with. But another thing I learned from that is all 6 of us, having gone to engineering school together, had very overlapping skill sets and we all wanted to do similar types of work. And so I think working with people who have the right overlap with you, where you still communicate well, you get along, but you're bringing different things to the business is really important. I think another one was about the value of working incrementally. We were we didn't want to compromise on anything. We were we want to sell to public schools. We want to raise VC money. We want to fix everything for everyone. And so there was no process of scoping anything down or making trade-offs. And so now when I'm building something, I try to think about, okay, it's going to be really good at this one thing. And that means it's going to be bad at these other 5. Or maybe it's going to be good at 4, and that means it's going to be bad at these 2. And so you can't do 100% everything. You have to decide what the trade-offs are and what the value proposition is for the people you were trying to help.
Sure. So I can probably just first is the team that you build and the capabilities that the team brings. And second is prioritizing what your offerings are based on the target consumers or customers that you have.
Yes, exactly. That was much more concise than I was.
Shifting gears a bit, how do you approach the process of product development and how do you see metrics? Because there's a lot of emphasis on DAOs and MAOs in today's world. And I feel that with the social media and with the number of hits that happen on products, people are giving a lot of importance to that. So what is your outlook on that?
Yeah. So when I think about product and prioritization, I tend to think of it in 4 buckets. And I think they happen at different times in the life stages of a product. So I think the first thing, especially for startups, is it's usually you have some unique insight. They're often called earned insights, where it's this idea of you can see something other people can't see. And so you start moving in that direction because like you've worked in an industry and you know a way that you can fix it, or you've personally felt a pain point. But like you're starting from something that's not like I ran a bunch of data. You're usually starting from some unique perspective. Then what ends up happening is I tend to think of it as you want to validate that other people feel that and like the value proposition you think is there based on the insight actually is. And so at that point, I tend to rely much more on, you could do a little bit of market research, but I rely much more on ethnographic research and really getting a prototype in front of people, seeing how they interact with it, interviewing people about their experience with that problem. And then I think only after you really get those 2 things right, where you know that it resonates for you and you've seen that like it's not just a only you thing, that's when the data starts to become effective. And that's when I would do it pretty early on, but that's when like looking at your daily actives, weekly actives, and monthly actives really starts to matter. And I think before you even get to those metrics, I really like this framework from Mark Roberge, who is the chief revenue officer at HubSpot, where he talks about you want to get a certain percentage of users who join in a given month doing a certain number of events within a certain time. So say it's a calendar product. I'm thinking of Command Dot, which is a calendar product that just announced. But if I was them, I would be looking at the idea of like, how many of our users who sign up book 3 meetings using Command Dot within the first day or week or something like that, and use that to be assessing how effectively I'm doing.
That's quite an interesting insight. And once we develop prototypes and once we get it tested, we sort of have this validation from customers' point of view or users' point of view, right? But how do we stitch it to the objectives that we are trying to meet? Because sometimes we are doing blind testing. We don't really tell them what exactly is the vision. How do we solve for that particular gap?
I think with that, I tend to try to listen to what people are saying. And so I'll get them talking to me about the experience as much as possible. So like when you're using this, what are you thinking? It's called talk aloud protocol a lot, and just try to get them to give me as much information as possible and see if it matches.
Sure. And then we sort of make sense of it and we try to stitch it with what our objectives are, or we scope correct if we feel that there's a huge gap in what they are expecting and what we are building.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Now product and product management world has taken a mammoth shape. So what do you see as some of the biggest trend that would come in the product world? How we build products or how the products are going to interact with customers? Anything that you can think of in the next decade?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me, especially having worked on Dark most recently, is how we're able to prototype even more quickly. So we're seeing a lot of things like it becomes much easier to build things out of the box now that we have Shopify and we have Stripe, and all of our tooling is getting a lot better. And so I think there's going to be a lot more that makes it very easy for even product managers to be able to set up a prototype quickly and work with that, rather than even the prototyping process be like, okay, like let's carefully define the scope and then let's invest engineering resources in getting to the right prototype, or design resources, whatever it is. I think product managers with new tooling are going to be able to do even more upfront research.
Yeah. That does seem probable to me as well. Ellen, how do you see failure, in the product world? Because the stakes are high. Everything is on the product manager's shoulder. Sometimes they're also called product owners. So firstly, do you think failure is an acceptable trait to have as a product manager? And if at all one fails at building real products and launching them, what does one do after that?
Yeah, I guess there's this scope of like, how big of a failure are we talking? So I think if we're talking on the more micro, you're going to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. And I think as a product manager, I think a lot of people feel like they're supposed to know and they're supposed to know it's going to work. And like, You're not, it's okay. No one can possibly know everything that's going to work or not. And so from that perspective, I think it's a lot easier, especially starting out, if you go in with this idea of, I am going to make mistakes, and like a plan for what's going to happen when you do. So like when I make a mistake, I'm going to tell my team honestly, and I'm going to explain to them what happened. And sort of level setting that for yourself, I think makes it a much less stressful. Even beyond that, there are frequently pretty high profile things like this week Quibi announcing it was shutting down was like huge product news because they spent so much money and effort for this outcome. So I think from that perspective, as a product manager, I think your job is to, I guess, fail as effectively as possible. And I don't think of that as being a failure. So if you put out a test and it doesn't work, like that's great. The whole point of the test was to confirm or disconfirm your hypothesis. So if you've disconfirmed it, you've succeeded in your goal. And that means you can start another test to figure out something. And I think with startups, like investors, when they're thinking about them, assume that 9 out of 10 are going to fail. And so just because you've tried a startup and like that one didn't work, there's a lot of times where that's like market timing or something else. There's also times, obviously, where you've picked the wrong team or you've hoped for the wrong series of events that are improbable to happen. But I think from that perspective, it's not career ending at all. You go on and you figure out something else and you take the learnings from what you've worked on and apply them to the next thing.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I myself have encountered some of these nuances personally, so I can connect a lot. Also, I've noticed one thing which is happening is now every company and every startup wants automation. So what do you think is the position of automation coming forward? Do you think that everything is going to be automated, or do you think that there's still scope for some software or hardware, online, offline things to be non-automated?
I definitely think there will still be non-automated things. I think something people don't really talk about enough is sort of the role some of these non-automated tasks play in our life, where a lot of the times when I'm just like answering some email, and maybe not answering emails, but like they're tasks that you're doing where like you're moving numbers around a spreadsheet, but you're actually like working on a real problem in the back of your head, sort of the same way people talk about having ideas in the shower. And so I don't think everyone has the energy level to be like 100% focused on the most important problem for 8 hours a day while sitting at their desk. Like people don't work like that. And so from that perspective, I think we'll keep some of those tasks. I think it's more about what are people doing that isn't efficient, that can be replaced with something that works more effectively or something that helps them understand how to be more productive or something like that.
Right. Okay. So then how does Dark help in enhancing the self-serve ability of programmers or developers? Or do you see it as still a facilitator for technical people?
Yeah. So I guess I'll talk to this more generally. I'm no longer at Dark, so I can't speak to like what specifically Dark will do or won't do going forwards. But from my perspective, I think we need both of those things. So I think one of the things that's changed about software development over time is the infrastructure complexity has ballooned. And so for most people who are just trying to set up a simple website, you don't need to know how to use Kubernetes to do that. You frankly don't need Kubernetes to do that. But it's gotten like really difficult. And so the barriers to entry are much higher than they used to be. And then similarly, like I was saying before, we're getting this push on the other side where people want to be able to prototype more quickly. We want to be able to test our ideas and we want people to be able to build things. And so I think what's going to happen is there will continue to be infrastructure tools that are designed for experts, but I think we will start to see a wave of, we're already seeing the wave of no code. I think we're going to see a wave of no code that allows people to start to get into code. So it looks like no code when you're starting, which eases people in and makes them not afraid of it. And then you start to have some programmable capability like in Excel, and you start to manipulate things that way. But I think being able to get progressively more complex as you learn about the tooling and as you want to solve for harder use cases is really valuable. And that's where I expect the future of developer tooling to go.
Sure, that really makes a lot of sense. We right now we have had White Hat Junior enter India. So now they have this wave of promotion that everybody should know coding, and coding is the next new thing. So I really don't think that that's how things should be, right? There should be tools and softwares that should aid the process of coding, and not everybody can do coding. So very, very useful point. Lastly, what would you say that would be the top strategies or tips for young professionals who are starting out in their careers, especially in the product world?
Yeah, I have a few. And it's funny because you're always like kind of giving advice to your past self when you're thinking about people who are starting out in product, and the world has obviously changed since then. I think a big one is to make sure you're asking for feedback on your work from everyone around you. Again, it goes to that idea of like, oh, you think you're supposed to know everything. When you're starting a product, you don't know what you're doing. And so it makes sense, like, talk to the engineering leaders you work with, talk to marketing leaders you work with, see if the work that you're doing is actually helping them and it fits well into your team structure. It's also a good way to get like an honest assessment and hear if you're doing well or not. And that can like help you grow in your own skills. So I think that's one thing that's really important. And then I think the other thing is probably, and again, this is like more personal and reflective, but figure out what really motivates you about your work and what it is about the product role that like really speaks to you, because there's a lot of parts of it that aren't necessarily fun or like feel kind of well, some people like them. I find the parts that are like scheduling rather tedious myself. But like some people like really get the joy out of making the schedule run perfectly. So figuring out what parts of the role are really good for you and making sure you're on teams where you're able to do that work.
Sure, that's actually very helpful. If I may just add my personal experience, so I've recently started out as a product manager. Earlier, I was in the product field, but not really making products or developing them. And I exactly align with this fact that when you're new, you want to prove that you know everything, but you really don't know. And especially with the different industries, because as a product manager, you don't know which industry and which product are you going to land up in. And so one should not shy away from taking feedback from seniors, peers. We have so much access right now to so many people who are willing to help. And I approached people like you or people. I have started this YouTube channel to sort of help people understand more about what one should do or share experiences. Thank you so much, Ellen. And now going forward, are you going to continue investing and working with startups? What are your plans ahead?
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time with startups I've invested in recently, so that's been really enjoyable. I am thinking about potentially starting something again, but I haven't landed on exactly what yet.
Sure. I think we'll all look out for it. And thank you so much for being here, for sharing your inputs. I'm sure everybody found them very helpful. So everyone, I hope you've found this video helpful. You can reach out to Ellen on LinkedIn, or she has her own website. I'll link her details below. For any other questions, please feel free to comment below. Thank you so much. Take care.